I quickly want to say thank you to the organizers for having me here today. I'm very excited to be here. I'm very excited to hear the other presentations. And now I'm very happy to share this information with you. So just to reiterate what was said, so my research very generally focuses on drug-induced neuroadaptations or brain changes and their relationship with subjective and behavioral alterations. That being said, I'm particularly interested in psychedelic-induced changes, specifically those that may hold potential therapeutic value for very common and very difficult to treat disorders, so thinking, depression, and anxiety. So examples of these changes include alterations or... Can you hear me? Yes?
It was good before, actually.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was okay before?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Include alterations or enhancements in higher order cognitive processes that may actually play a role in symptom alleviation. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. And I'm going to talk about two psychedelics, namely Ayahuasca and Psilocybin, and the work that we have done at Maastricht University to assess the effect these substances have on these cognitive processes. So to start off, you might be asking, what is cognitive flexibility? So cognitive flexibility in psychology is defined as the readiness for which one can switch between mental sets in order to adapt and appropriately respond to an ever-changing environment. For our purpose, I really want you to think of it as kind of an umbrella term that encompasses and facilitates similar and equally important cognitive processes. So these include creativity, which allows us to switch gears, find new ways to solve problems, this whole thinking outside of the box, and empathy, which allows us to perceive a situation or understand a concept from another person's perspective. So I'm going to go into both of these processes in more detail today in our research into them. But I'll start with creativity. So I think this. Okay. So creativity, I'm assuming you're all somewhat familiar with it. It's a common concept, but it's actually quite difficult to define what creativity is. And when you want to study it, you really have to have this definition. So the general consensus is that creativity is a multi-component construct consisting of two different things. So we have divergent thinking, where individuals come up with as many solutions as possible for a problem, and convergent thinking, where individuals then pick the best solution for that problem. So both are really, as I said, they make up creativity, but it's been suggested that divergent thinking is a better marker of the creative potential in daily life. Thus, most tests of creativity actually only assess divergent thinking. But to put this in practice, right, so an example of these processes, so let's say that you were on your way here today, and your car broke down. So you were really excited to be here, you wanted to be here on time, so you start thinking of how to reach this goal. So you start coming up with possibilities. Maybe there is a bus stop down the road, or a train station, or perhaps your friend who's also coming to this conference is living around the corner. So this is then divergent thinking, right? Coming up with these solutions. But then you have to decide what to do. So what is the best solution to get you, to meet your goal, to get you here on time? So perhaps you think, okay, the bus is super slow, the train doesn't really come close, but you know your friend hasn't left yet, and there's room in his car. So as you can imagine, this is a super important ability. We use it really all the time. But it's been found to be decreased in certain pathologies, so like depression, like anxiety, PTSD. So finding a way to enhance this ability in individuals who have a deficit is of interest. And that's where psychedelics could potentially come in. So there are a large number of anecdotal reports of enhanced psychedelic use, enhanced creative capacity after psychedelic use. So individuals from Aldous Huxley to Steve Jobs have acknowledged the role psychedelics played in regards to their work. Additionally, some studies have looked into this. So a survey study asked about 100 artists with at least one psychedelic experience how it affected their work. So 70% claimed that it had significantly affected their work content, and over half claimed that they showed significant improvement in their artistic technique after this experience. Experimental studies also show a positive association between creativity and psychedelic use. But the nature of this relationship is really unclear. So there are not many studies. And the studies that we do have different methodologies, looking at different substances, different time points, so it's still not clear what comes first, right? It's the creativity or the psychedelic. So that's what we in Maastricht wanted to do, actually, was to objectively assess, does a psychedelic enhance creativity? So this is what we did. This is published now, it's been out for a while. And we employed a different type of study design. So this is a naturalistic study. We go out kind of into the wild and collect data. And if you want to read more about it, you can find it here, but I'm going to walk you through what we did. So as Chris mentioned today, you know what ayahuasca is, so I'll go through this quickly. So again, it's a South American plant tea that generally consists of two parts. So the stems of the coffee vine that contain the beta-carboline alkaloids, and the leaves of the viridis bush. So these have the psychedelic DMT. And we explained to you how, this is quite an interesting concoction, right? You need both the vine and the leaves in order to experience the effects of DMT. And he represents very nicely what those effects might be. So ayahuasca has been around for a very, very long time. Traditionally used in the Amazon for ritualistic purposes and medicinal purposes. But over the last few decades, there's been an increase in the availability of the brew to individuals outside of the Amazon. So specifically, ayahuasca-based religions have spread to the EU, to the US, and thus more people have come into contact with it. But out of this, there's now an increased number of anecdotal reports of what the substance may do. So individuals report therapeutic effects, and they also report enhanced creativity. So it's also why we are interested out of the psychedelics to look at ayahuasca. So what we did is we visited 2 ayahuasca ceremonies, and we employed 2 creativity tests. And then we employed them at 2 different time points. So individuals filled them out at baseline, before they took any ayahuasca, and then during the effects of ayahuasca, so after they had taken the brew, while they were tripping. And I'm going to do this in both of the studies today. I really want to explain to you what these tests actually consist of. So if we say that ayahuasca enhances creativity, I think it's really important that you understand how we measure creativity. So this is one of the tests we use. This is a pattern line meanings test. And in this, individuals are seeing pictures like this and asked to come up with as many explanations as possible as to what this picture could be. So they see 8 of these items, and they have 2 minutes each to write down what they think it is. And then they're scored on various different outcome measures. So fluency, which is the number of different responses they come up with. Originality, so how unique is your score. And this is compared to other people. So if we are both at this ayahuasca ceremony, I say this looks like a hedgehog, you also say this looks like a hedgehog, then we have very low originality score because it's not unique. And then the ratio of the 2. And as I said before, so most of these tests assess divergent thinking, and this is one of them. But this is why we also employed the picture concept tests. So this looks at both divergent thinking and convergent thinking. And what this does is you see a group of pictures like this, and we first ask them to come up with a logical association. So there's a correct answer to this. The correct answer for this one would be what's going on? Would be the 2 and the 3, because these are both animals, so it's the easiest association that you can make. But then we ask them to come up with as many alternative solutions as possible. So this is the divergent thinking. So perhaps you pick 1 and 3 because your cat drinks milk out of a saucer, something like this. So again, they see many pictures, so it's repeated. So 28 of these groups, and they get 1 minute per trial in order to come up with as many solutions as possible. And the outcome measures are the same as the pattern lines meaning test. However, we also have a score of convergent thinking, so whether they got the first answer right, whether they said that 2 and 3 were a logical association. Another aspect of this that I think is really cool, we were able to get a sample of the brew from all of our different sites. So with the sample, we could actually analyze how much DMT was in the brew that they were drinking, how much harmine, how much harmaline. And yeah, I don't have my pointer. We do see that the levels of DMT do differ between the groups, but we also measured how much each individual drank. But we also measured how much each individual drank. So we see in group 2 it's higher, but they drank less DMT actually. So in the end, it kind of equaled out. So I wanted to give you an example of what these results may look like. So this is the pattern line meaning test. We have before ayahuasca and after ayahuasca. Yeah, here's some laughing. So before ayahuasca, this individual, and this is the same person, wrote as to what this could be. So a woman's breasts, definitely. Domes in a desert or flatland, like those biospheres in the documentaries. 2 bowls on a plate face down. A twin sun is rising on the horizon. After ayahuasca, they said, 4 eyes are observing me on top of a metal throne. The 4 circles are revolving. The throne is vibrating with energy spreading fractal-like stripes to the sphere sitting. So, I'm assuming because you're laughing, you might see a difference. It seems like there's a difference. But actually, what we found is statistically there was not a difference on this test. So people, on average, performed the same. As for the PCT, though, we do see a significant difference. So the black is before and then the gray is after. We see that after ayahuasca, divergent thinking is enhanced, whereas convergent thinking, interestingly enough, is decreased. So yeah, this is very interesting. As I said, creativity is a sum of both of these constructs. So with this, we cannot say ayahuasca enhances creativity. We can say ayahuasca enhances divergent thinking and decreases convergent thinking acutely. So the study definitely had some strengths, so we were able to look at the acute effects of ayahuasca, and we were able to compare it to baseline, so before individuals had any substance. Additionally, we were able to differentiate the effects of ayahuasca on convergent versus divergent thinking, and we could look at the volume and the content of the drink. But this left us with some remaining questions, as always. So what about the long-term effects? So it's super great if ayahuasca enhances divergent thinking, but does this last? Or does the deficit in convergent thinking last? Additionally, are we looking at ayahuasca or are we looking at the ceremony? So I don't think I explained it, but ayahuasca is commonly taken in a group setting. People go there for a reason. Oftentimes they're joined by, there are other people there for similar reasons. They talk about why they're there. They talk about their experiences. They integrate their experience together, what it could mean for them, and it's a very supportive setting. So we definitely think this could have some, benefits. So we don't know what we are looking at in this. And additionally, we did not assess the relationship between, for example, enhanced divergent thinking and subjective outcomes. So mood, well-being, quality of life, these kind of things that are important therapeutically would be interesting to see the relationship between them. So I'm not going to show you, I'll just tell you quickly. We did extend this study, so we're doing something similar, going to ayahuasca ceremonies, but we've changed some of our measures to answer some of our questions. So now we are measuring at baseline the morning after ayahuasca, and then 1 week after ayahuasca. So here we get longer term effects. And we have added subjective questionnaire, so again, mood, this type of thing. So we can look at the relationship between creativity and this. However, we cannot separate ayahuasca from the ceremony. Believe it or not, most people who go to an ayahuasca ceremony take ayahuasca. So this is impossible. And also, we are not able to look at the relationship between creativity and more complex cognitive processes. So these take time, you have to train individuals, and you have very, very limited time at these ceremonies. People are there for a reason, and it's not to do your research, so you're not able to do this. So to answer these questions, we actually started another study. In this study, we're looking at the effects of psilocybin on cognitive flexibility. This is a placebo-controlled study. This is a laboratory study. And with this, we are able to answer some of these questions. So we can control for the setting. And we can look at the relationship with more complex cognitive processes. So between creativity and empathy, for example. So to give you a relationship, to give you an idea of what this relationship might look like, so what we are trying to see. So flexible creative thinking facilitates goal-directed behavior in that it allows individuals to adjust to a changing environment and come up with ways to tackle problems. So think of the brainstorm we did earlier. However, as I said, this is decreased in certain pathologies like depression, in that individuals display very rigid, automatic thinking, which facilitates then habitual behavior. So a more clinical example of this, individuals with depression are oftentimes characterized by an inability to derive pleasure from their environment. Thus, a thought might be that the world is a dull and empty place. Individuals then have a low mood, again, lack pleasure, might feel hopeless, and this causes them to then cut off social contact and remain in bed because what's the point? So this is a vicious cycle. But if you could perhaps change this type of thinking, and maybe encourage individuals to think more flexibly, you might be able to change the cycle, right? So an example, again, a brainstorm. Ask somebody, list some positive things in the world. They then might think, okay, the world isn't so terrible. Their mood becomes elevated, they might get more optimistic, regain some pleasure back in their lives, and they get out of bed and rekindle old relationships. Now, I know it's not this easy. I know I wish it was. I know it doesn't work like this. You have to intervene and potentially kickstart this process. So what we want to see is, can psilocybin kickstart this process? Can it enhance this flexible creative thinking that could potentially lead to this behavior shift? Additionally, it's suggested a relationship between empathy and cognitive flexibility. So empathy is also a multi-component construct consisting of cognitive empathy, so knowing how another person feels, and emotional empathy, so being able to feel what another person feels. It's been suggested that cognitive flexibility is a prerequisite for empathy. This makes sense. In order to be able to feel or know what another person is feeling, you have to be able to think flexibly. You have to be able to think outside of yourself. And there's also been shown a positive association between creativity and empathy. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to assess the effect of psilocybin on these processes. So just to make sure everybody's on the same page, psilocybin is the component in magic mushrooms or truffles, which here in the Netherlands. Once ingested, it's broken down to psilocin, which is then the metabolite that causes these subjective effects. So these include visual and audio perceptual alterations, changes in mood, changes in self-awareness, so people can become very self-aware or less self-aware, so I think ego dissolution. And I just showed the picture here, like Chris said earlier, to show you how structurally similar psilocin is to serotonin. So it acts on the 5-HT2A receptor, which is the serotonin receptor. And we picked psilocybin for multiple reasons. So practical reasons, it's a lot easier to study psilocybin than ayahuasca. But also there's been a lot of work that's been done with this substance. So Imperial has been leading this in every aspect. And they've shown that psilocybin induces a brain state that can potentially promote cognitive flexibility. And clinical studies have shown that psilocybin potentially elicits therapeutic relief in individuals with a preference for habitual behavior. So at Imperial, they showed that psilocybin reduced symptom severity, depression symptom severity, Griffiths found that psilocybin reduced symptoms of depression and anxiety in individuals with terminal cancer. Johnson found that psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy helped with smoking addiction treatment. And Moreno found that psilocybin decreased symptoms of obsessive-compulsive disorder. Furthermore, it's been shown that psilocybin enhances emotional empathy. So Zurich, the team in Zurich found that it enhances this acutely. So while individuals are under the influence of psilocybin, we found that it also enhances it in the long term. So again, this is just a snapshot from another study where instead of ayahuasca ceremonies, we went to psilocybin ceremonies. So here in the Netherlands, in collaboration with the Psychedelic Society. And we find that compared to baseline, the morning after psilocybin administration and a week later, individuals reported higher levels of emotional empathy. So, taking all that into consideration, we wanted to use psilocybin as a tool to enhance this flexible, creative thinking and facilitate a behavior shift. We want to do this acutely, so while individuals are under the influence, and in the long term. So, our long term is 7 days. We also wanted to see whether psilocybin would deter a stress-induced shift back to their original behavior. So, I haven't spoken about stress yet. I think it's quite common knowledge that stress can really dramatically affect individuals with mental health disorders. It can make symptoms worse. So if you think back to the example I gave earlier, but the individual who thought the world was a terrible place, changed their thinking style, then they thought the world wasn't so terrible. If something very stressful would happen to that person, let's say something terrible, they lose a family member, it's not too far-fetched to think that they would go back to their original thinking style. So we wanted to model this and see if psilocybin made people more stress-resilient. And finally, if psilocybin can do all of these things, we want to know how. So as I said, this is an experimental study. It was double-blind, meaning myself as the researcher and the participants did not know what treatment they were getting. Randomized, people were randomly allocated to groups, placebo-controlled, and parallel group design. So individuals enter the study, they only get one treatment. This is because it's been suggested that psychedelics have long-term effects. We are recruiting 120 people for this study. It's a very big study. That's why it's ongoing, because it takes a long time. And we have 4 treatment conditions. So we have psilocybin, we have placebo, we have psilocybin and ketanserine, and placebo and ketanserine. So ketanserine is an antihypertensive that blocks the 5-HT2A receptor. So this is the proposed main site of action for these psychedelics. By blocking it, we can see if this is, the site of action. If psilocybin enhances creativity, for example, if it does so by the 5-HT2A receptor. And as I said, we had 2 testing days, 7 days apart. So this is a very light schematic of the testing day. This is the first testing day. So individuals come in for baseline questionnaires, blood samples, etc. They then receive the treatment, so 1 of 4. And then throughout the testing day, we have our different cognitive tasks. Then on the second testing day, it looks the same. However, instead of psilocybin, they get stress, a lot less fun. And now the subjective stage, we compare it to the week before, so we get this assessment of longer-term effects. So as for what we're looking at, so for baseline, we have questionnaires looking at mood, personality, anxiety. Throughout the testing day, we're repeatedly asking them, so we have a VAS, a subjective high, how high they are, how much under the influence of psilocybin they are, and what their mood is. And then at the end of the testing day, when all effects have subsided, they have extra questionnaires. So did they experience ego dissolution, the 5 DASC that Timo talked about, and any persisting effects. As for this habitual versus goal-directed behavior, so we are recruiting healthy participants, meaning we have to model this pathological behavior, and we do this with cognitive tasks. So usually extremely boring cognitive tasks. So in this, what we're doing is we're teaching people a habit. And what people learn is that when they see a picture on an outside of a box, they respond in a certain way, and they get a certain reward, and this gives them points. and their goal is to earn as many points as possible. So they do this for hours. It's automatic. They know the associations. But afterwards, again, we want to see if we can break the habit, so we have to break it. So what we do is we devalue some of these rewards. So now individuals are told if this stimuli previously led to a coffee cup, now you have to consciously make a decision to change your behavior. So now they have to respond in a different way. Is that clear? So it's the goal-directed versus the habitual behavior. For creativity, again, we have the PCT, which I explained earlier. And we have the alternate uses test. So this is a very classic test of divergent thinking, only divergent thinking. And individuals are given a word like chair, like an everyday object, and they're asked to come up with as many uses as possible for that object. So their rates are very similar to the PCT, so fluency, how many uses they can come up with, originality, how unique they are, flexibility, and elaboration, so a level of detail. So if I say that I sit on a chair, that's less elaborate to say than if I say I sit on a chair to read a newspaper in the morning. So it's compared to all of the participants. And finally, we have the empathy test. So as I said, empathy consists of cognitive empathy and emotional empathy. So in cognitive empathy, they have to choose how the person is feeling. And then emotional empathy, they have to choose how they feel in relation to the picture. And then finally, as I said, the second test day, we do all the measures again, but instead of the fun psilocybin, we have the not-so-fun stress test. So this is the Maastricht acute social stress test, and in this, individuals are sat at a computer, and the computer is telling them to do one of two things. So the computer says either put your hand in a bucket of very, very, very cold water, so this is single-digit cold water, or it's telling them to do mental arithmetic. So I personally think the mental arithmetic is also very difficult. You have to count back from 2043 in steps of 17 out loud. While you're doing it, you're surrounded by researchers who are staring at you, not smiling, only say anything when you get the mental arithmetic wrong. Then they say, wrong. Start over at 2043. And on top of that, they have a camera pointing in their face, recording their facial expressions. So it's stressful. It works. I've done it. It's not nice, but it's what we need it for. And the nice part of this test as well is that it also has a placebo version, so we can also control it for this. And in the placebo version is much nicer. Obviously, there's no camera. The math, it's not math. You just count 1 to 25, so the researchers don't have to be mean to you. And then the water is lukewarm. All right. So we want to see if psilocybin, how it affects these processes. And as I said, we want to know if it does, how it does that. And by doing that, we're looking at various different measures. And this isn't to overload you with information, this is just to give you an idea of what we're looking at. So we are looking at brain activity, so changes in connectivity while under psilocybin versus the other treatments. We are looking at the role of the 5-HT2A receptor, so when we block it out, we can see if these effects last. And from that, we're also interested in neuronal integrity. So it's been suggested that psychedelics enhance neuroplasticity, so we're looking at markers of this in blood. It's also been suggested that psychedelics enhance immune system functioning, so we're looking at markers of that in blood. Different hormones can play a role in this, so we're looking at cortisol, which is a stress reactivity hormone. We're looking at oxytocin, which can be related to empathy. This is the love or social bonding hormone. Additionally, we're interested in other neurotransmitter systems, so we're looking at glutamate and GABA. So again, this isn't to overload you, but just to give you an idea that if psilocybin does these things, we want to get the biggest picture as possible of how it does that. Okay, so that's our study in a nutshell. As I said, it's a very big study, and it's ongoing. So I don't have any results to show you. I do have some kind of behind-the-scenes pictures maybe you want to see. So on the left, we test our participants in the building with our scanners. So this is a public building. It's because we put them in the scanner at peak. We don't want to walk them back and forth across buildings. So we make a private area for them. We screen it off. Where the picture is taken, there's a couch, really comfy blankets and pillows. We give them some books to look at, so that's a National Geographic picture book, if anybody's wondering, and some plants, etc. So individuals or participants are told that if at any time during the testing day they want to go there or they need to go there, this is their private space, they can go there at any time. Then on the right, as I said, and they are going in the scanner. So this is a picture of one of the participants in the scanner. So we're using the 7T, which might not mean much to everybody, but basically it's a giant magnet. It can be intimidating, it makes noises, but for whatever reason our giant magnet comes with a setting where we can play funky neon psychedelic lights around it. You can see it there, and these change. So this is blue, then it goes green, red, etc. I haven't gotten an answer as to why we have this setting, but I really like it, and the participants really like it. So when they walk in, it's not this intimidating big machine that everybody says, ooh, it looks like a spaceship, and they're much more apt to get in the spaceship than they are the magnet. So it's worked very well for us. Yeah. So those are the two studies I was going to share with you today. They're examples of what we're doing in Maastricht University. There are many more examples, but I don't have enough time. But I just want to summarize the therapeutic implications of this. So I went over this kind of already when talking about the rationale, but just to summarize. So flexible creative thinking allows you to adopt adaptive interpretations and generate new and effective cognitive strategies, behavioral strategies. In other words, it allows you to look at a situation or an event in your life in a different way, and perhaps allow you to reevaluate how you respond to it. So how psychedelics, to put it again, how psychedelics could help this. So if psychedelics, or any substance really, acutely enhance this flexible creative thinking, it could help patients relive these past events that are still affecting them, and recall associations without inhibition, and discuss with their therapist, are these associations actually appropriate? Then if this ability is enhanced in the long term, this could be suited in maybe a second integration system, or second integration where you sit down with your therapist, you discuss the experiences you have, your new thoughts about it, your new associations with it, and find better ways to cope with it, given that you aren't coping with it properly now. As for empathy, so it's been implicated actually in symptom severity of depression. So by enhancing empathy alone, this could play a role in symptom alleviation. But I think more importantly, by finding a pharmacological agent that could enhance empathy, this could have a really big impact on therapy sessions, so the relationship between the patient and the therapist. So if you can enhance empathy, the patient might have enhanced feelings of openness and trust towards the therapist, and this strengthens the therapeutic alliance, so their relationship. And this is really important for I think every disorder, every situation where you're seeing a therapist, but it's been particularly shown to be important in people with PTSD. But I think that will be talked about later a bit more. So thank you for your attention. That was it from me.
Thank you, Natasha. Are there any questions? Let's start there.
Thank you, it was a really nice presentation. My question is about the therapeutic implications. Because usually when people talk about therapeutic implications of psychedelics, it's about depression, PTSD and such. In my own research I'm focusing on functional somatic symptoms, so physical symptoms for which no bodily cause can be found. And these can basically be seen as like a constant aversive somatosensory hallucination, or really resilient predictive coding error. And I think there may be a therapeutic potential of psychedelics there precisely for the reasons you just told. And I was wondering if you know if anyone has made that potential link yet.
So I do. It's a very, very good question, and I think a lot of these different disorders need to be looked into. I'm not a therapist, so that's kind of area I'm not sure in, but I haven't heard of anybody making the link with psychedelics in that particular disorder.
So I may have just missed this in your presentation, but so I work in a lab where we look at goal-directed and habitual behavior in animals, and of course one of the most common way to make an animal habitual is just to train it longer than for the goal-directed behavior. Is that the same thing you're doing here, like the habitual cues, you just train the people for longer on them, rather than the goal-directed cues, there's a shorter training?
There's no training with the goal-directed cues. We just train them on the habitual, and then we break the pattern right, and they have to consciously make the decision to break that habit.
And what are your what is the actual quantitative readout of like goal-directed versus habitual?
Yeah, so from this task, it's usually used in a different way with people with OCD. So quantitatively, you look at the amount of points they get, which is reflected in the amount of correct responses they give and how quickly they give them. With psilocybin, I think people will just inherently respond slower. So I am going to look at all of these, but my focus is more on how many correct responses they gave. It separates from how quickly they did it.
All right, my question was, would you say that convergent and divergent thinking are on a continuum? Because you said that at the start of your presentation that the one of the two, the divergent thinking, I think, got larger and the convergent thinking got smaller after subjects had PTSD.
Isn't are they separately on a continuum or on a continuum together?
Did you optimize on one of the two?
I don't know if I'm understanding the question.
So if you are better at convergent thinking, it automatically makes you less...
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, no, they are separate constructs, and you can actually see this in the brain as well when individuals think divergently or convergently. Separate areas are activated. So I don't think they have that type of relationship.
Okay. Another one, why don't you just let people smoke DMT? It's way easier to...
For the ayahuasca?
Yeah.
So the ayahuasca studies we are not doing in our lab.
No.
So it's very difficult to do lab studies with ayahuasca for many reasons, one of them being we don't have the ayahuasca to give to the people. So when you do these type of studies, it really has to be pharmaceutical grade substances. So we have that with psilocybin, we have that with LSD. We don't have that with ayahuasca. We are going to these ceremonies where there are facilitators administering these treatments, and we are just there to collect data. So we are going to ayahuasca ceremonies, and we're also going to 5-MeO-DMT, if you are familiar with that, and various other ones. But we have no control over how the drug is given, and we don't interfere in any way in regards to that. We just happen to know where they are, and we show up with our laptops.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, not crazy.
Anyone else?
Thank you. So my question is about convergent thinking for creativity, because I think it's a bit of a problem that, okay, you can think of a lot of solutions, but you can't really think of what to actually do. Is it a permanent thing? Does it stay for a long time? And does ayahuasca or DMT have the same effects as the psilocybin when it comes to convergent thinking?
So, very good question, very relevant. We don't know yet. So, as I said, we're extending the ayahuasca study. So at that time, we were only looking acutely. So individuals showed decreased convergent thinking while they were under the influence. Now we are looking to see if that persists. I have a colleague who's also working on this data, and at least what she looked at, this is very tentative, but I think it did not persist. I think it went back to normal. And as for your second question, if they would affect convergent and divergent thinking similarly, from a pharmacological perspective, I think so, because if this action is mediated by the 5-HT2A receptor, then I think it would be similar. again, ayahuasca is a component of DMT and harmine and harmaline, etc. If that harmine and harmaline play a role, then they wouldn't have the same response.
This is a bit of a question for my curiosity. You said it's a double-blind experiment. I don't know what dosages you're using, but isn't it pretty obvious at some point, for you at least?
This is an issue with any sort of treatment that severely alters your consciousness. It's usually quite apparent. That being said, I have had at least one person who did get placebo and they really thought they were on psilocybin, so it can go the other way. Yeah, but we try as much as we can. We try to be as blind as possible, but it can be an issue. But this dose, yeah, it's hard to compare it to recreational doses because you don't know how much psilocybin is in truffles or magic mushrooms. But my participants report it as kind of a medium dose.
Thank you. That was very interesting. The patients that are involved, or the research subjects that are involved in your current study, are they diagnosed with a particular type of depression?
No.
Or, and also, do you offer any therapy? Is it embedded in any sort of therapeutic or spiritual context?
Yeah, no, so we're extrapolating these results to therapeutic situations, but we only test currently healthy volunteers. So nobody has depression. Actually, if they have depression, we cannot include them. So that test that I showed you where we teach people the habits, this is our cognitive model of this pathological behavior. So we treat people to have this depressive symptom. Obviously, it's not a depressive symptom. They're not harmed in any way. But this is how we model it.
But can you extrapolate from like an habitual sort of response to a computer screen into long-lasting depression in which people are habitually?
Yeah, no, of course, that is the issue, though, is how far can you do these implications go? But this is the best we have right now. So we're trying our hardest for that. I mean, in the future, studies now are being done with individuals with depression, so we can learn more from those and compare results and see.
I think that was it.
Okay,
thanks again. Applause.